Welcome back to Giant Monster Games. I'm Adrian, and today we are doing Mardu Reanimator. This is a rogue deck, not a budget deck, but if you stick around to the end of the video, I will talk about some awesome budget options that you can actually build this deck on a budget. If you've been watching the channel for a while, or if you've just went through and watched all of our videos, you may actually recognize this deck because it was one we played with the Is It Delver deck. James, the deck's creator, actually sent this deck in. I have modified a little bit, mostly just in the mana base and a little bit in the sideboard. Nothing too crazy. The actual core of the deck has remained exactly the same. He sent it in so we could play it, which I have played it, and now I'm going to present it to you because this is an absolutely amazingly fun deck to play. I do want to remind you though, before we actually get into talking about the deck itself, to pound the like button, subscribe to Giant Monster Games, and leave a comment. These are all things that help with the channel and allow us to grow so we can make more content for you guys more often. Oh, and also always, there is voting up in the right-hand corner right up there. Feel free to go and vote for the next deck tech that I will be doing, because Ted and I actually do different voting for our own little videos nowadays. Anyhow, let's start out with what actually is a Reanimator deck. So a Reanimator deck has three parts to it. First is, what are we actually reanimating? What are our targets? What kind of creatures? What are we doing to actually get those creatures out of the graveyard? So what trickery are we using? And three, how are we getting stuff into the graveyard so we can actually reanimate it? So let's start with our reanimation package so you guys know how we're getting stuff out of the graveyard. The first thing we have is 4 copies of Footsteps of the Goryo. I may be horribly mispronouncing this this saying, I'm not gonna lie. We are running 4 copies of this guy because it is our main way of getting stuff out of the graveyard. So it says, return target creature from your graveyard to play. Sacrifice that creature at the end of turn. So this means that whatever we bring out of our graveyard is going to come into play, not have haste, so we can't really attack with it that turn, and then it's going to die. So keep this in mind. This is an extremely important card because this is actually what the deck is being built around. The second card we have is Unburial Rites. We're running 3 copies of this, and it is a 5-cost card that allows us to return target creature from our graveyard to the battlefield. And it also has flashback, so if we're discarding a bunch of cards, we can throw this with it and then later on cast that and pull the creature out of our graveyard onto the battlefield forever. Well, not forever, until it dies, actually. So that's how we're getting stuff out of the graveyard, but what are our actual targets? Well, the first thing we have is 2 copies of Moldgraft Monstrosity. Now, this guy is going to be allowing us to 2-for-1 creatures out of our graveyard if we play it with Footsteps. So Footsteps will bring him back, he will die, and then we're going to return 2 creature cards at random. So all of the creatures we're going to be putting into our graveyard, for the record, are absolutely amazing. To return 2 of them to play. So we're going to be getting 2 crazy creatures out of our graveyard with this guy. So that's the intention. We could also use Unburial Rites to get this guy out of our graveyard because he is an 8/8 with trample, which is also really nice, but the main objective is to get him out of the graveyard with Footsteps. Our next card, Woodfall Primus, which we're running 4 copies of, is easily one of the best targets we have that we can be getting out of our graveyard, specifically with Footsteps. So when Woodfall Primus comes into play, we get to destroy target non-creature permanent. Usually we're going to destroy a land, and then it dies with Footsteps. Because it has Persist, it immediately comes back into play, and we get to destroy another non-creature permanent, usually on turn 3 if everything lines up, which is quite often it does line up. We can actually destroy 2 of our opponent's lands on turn 3. So that kind of cripples our opponents most of the time. I would say 50% of the games our opponent just immediately scoops if we get this off on turn 3. So it is absolutely crazy. And then on top of that, he is also a 6/6 trample, or if he's come back with Persist, a 5/5 trample. So he's extremely powerful in this deck, and I absolutely love him. The next card, which is equally as awesome, is Ashen Rider. We have 4 copies of this guy, and it's doing almost the same thing that Woodfall Primus is, except it triggers when it enters the battlefield and when it leaves the battlefield, where Woodfall Primus leaves the battlefield and then sticks around because it comes back with Persist, and then we can actually be swinging in and killing our opponent with that guy, where Ashen Rider actually just immediately dies and goes away. But with Ashen Rider, we actually get to exile any permanent. So it could be a Planeswalker, it could be a land, it could be a creature we're having troubles with, so Ashen Rider becomes a really good way of just dealing with our opponent. Again, similar to Woodfall Primus, though, we usually are going to be targeting our opponent's lands because the objective of this specific build of the deck is to destroy our opponent's land base. I almost feel like the name of this deck should be Mardu Reanimator Land Destruction because this is what we're really trying to do in the deck. It's probably also worth pointing out that this is one of the few creatures we can actually hardcast if necessary. We don't ever want to get to that point, but it is a possibility because we are playing black and white, so we could in theory cast it from our hand if needed. And the last creature we have is 2 copies of Elesh Norn. Now, she is doing some crazy stuff in this deck, so not only does she make all of our creatures bigger, but she also usually wipes the board, especially if we're going up against anything that's going wide, we're using tokens, using any small creatures, because -2/-2 is a huge hit against a whole bunch of creatures in Modern, so she is really good. We could also theoretically hardcast her, but it's not really that important. It is really used to completely knock out our opponent and make our stuff really big and hard to deal with, because we do have a bunch of token generation in this deck, so when we play her, our tokens are going to get even bigger, which is kind of funny. So those are all of our targets, but what does our actual discard engine look like? Well, the first 2 cards we have are 4 copies of Faithless Looting and 4 copies of Cathartic Reunion. These cards are our primary way of getting stuff into our graveyard, because Faithless Looting is a turn 1 play where we get to draw 2 cards and then discard 2 cards of our choice. Cathartic Reunion is a little bit the other way around, where we have to discard 2 cards first and then draw cards, so Cathartic Reunion is a little bit less value for us, because sometimes we don't actually have cards we want to discard. We may have to discard lands or other stuff, but it does get stuff into the graveyard very quickly and very aggressively, and it does give us a lot of draw. 3 cards is a lot of cards to see. Usually our turn 1 and turn 2 plays is a combination of these 2 cards, but we do have some other cards that do allow us to discard, specifically Collective Brutality, which we're running 4 copies of, and Lightning Axe, which we're running 3 copies of. Now, these 2 cards are doing a little bit different because they are technically our control package. Lightning Axe allows us to destroy creatures, so usually we can use this to kill a creature and discard a card on first turn or second turn if we need to, and Collective Brutality basically is a toolbox card, which is why it's actually so expensive, because we can make a creature smaller, we can make our opponent lose life, we get to gain life, or we actually get to look at our opponent's hand and make them discard an instant or sorcery, and we get to discard a card every single time we choose more than one mode. So, in a perfect world, on turn 2, our opponent will have played a creature, and then we get to use all 3 of the modes, discarding 2 cards, killing the creature, gaining some life, killing our opponent a little bit, and removing a potentially card out of our opponent's hand, or at least seeing what's in their hand, because one of the problems we do run into, and I'll talk about this in the sideboard, is if our opponent can counter our Reanimator spells. So this allows us to at least deal with it in the main board if necessary. And that's a quick and simple run through of our discard engine because it's not too complicated. The other spell we have is actually Lingering Souls, which is fantastic in this deck because we can discard Lingering Souls and then play it out of our graveyard if necessary, or we can play it from our hand late game, mid game, whatever, because it does allow us to get some chump blockers onto the table so we can protect ourselves from early game rushes. You know, we sometimes have a little bit of trouble with aggro decks that are just rushing in, so this allows us to safeguard against that. And if our opponent doesn't deal with the spirits right away, usually Elesh Norn will come into play and make them all 3/3s, which is really, really funny. So that's why this card is amazing in this deck. And with that, that sums up all of the spells in the deck, but let's talk about the land base because it is quite extensive. The first cards we have is 4 copies of Bloodstained Mire and a single Marsh Flats. These cards allow us to fetch up whatever kind of lands we need so we can get all 3 colors of mana we need as fast as possible, because this deck does need options, specifically red and black options, by turn 1, turn 2, because there's different cards we're going to need to be playing depending on what we're doing, and we need to make sure we have all of our mana, and potentially we need turn 3 white mana as well, or turn 4 white mana, depending if we're playing Lingering Souls or Unburial Rites. So we want to be able to get all of our mana without any difficulty, and we want to be able to thin our deck a little bit, so these cards are helping us do that. The next lands we have is 4 copies of Blood Crypt, 1 Godless Shrine, and 1 Sacred Foundry. Now these are the targets we're usually fetching up because this is kind of the standard for Modern. You play a fetch land, then you go and shock a land in, so you have mana right away, and then you play whatever you need to. So this is pretty standard. They are very expensive. If you stick around, again, to the end of the video, I will talk about some cheaper land base. I'll actually give you a complete breakdown of what I would recommend if you're actually on a budget for the mana base, so don't worry. I know these are expensive. Just hold on. The next set of lands we have is 2 copies of Clifftop Retreat, 2 copies of Dragonskull Summit, and a single Isolated Chapel. These guys are normally going to be coming into play untapped because we have a lot of lands we're going to be fetching for, and because we have a bunch of basic lands as well, so they're actually very effective, and these are a little bit better than running all shock lands because these can come in untapped for free once we get one of those other lands out. Then we have a single copy of Ghost Quarter. This is allowing us to deal with man lands if necessary, Tron lands if we need to, and it also can help us really thin our opponent's deck out with lands if we want to make it so they don't have any lands to play with at all. It tends to be a little bit of a utility card for this deck. And lastly, we have a single mountain, a single plains, and 3 swamps. Time to talk about our sideboard. We have 3 copies of Blessed Alliance. This is helping us with aggro strategies where we need to maybe gain a little bit extra life or tap down some creatures or make our opponents sacrifice creatures. We have 3 copies of Guttural Response. This is helping with blue control because we do have a problem with blue control because they counter our reanimation spells. 2 copies of Nile Spellbomb. This is allowing us to deal with graveyards, so Dredge helps us keep down Snapcaster Mage, and it has an upside where we could potentially draw a card with it. 2 copies of Pithing Needle. This allows us to stop some cards that we do have some problems with, and it slows down some combo decks. A copy of Stony Silence for Tron. A single copy of Timely Reinforcements. This is again helping us with aggro decks. And 3 copies of Wear Tear to help us deal with artifact or enchantments that may be hating on our graveyard. That is the entire deck, but let me move over to some budget upgrades, starting out with our mana base. Some solid budget options would be Battlefield Forge, Concealed Courtyard, Forbidden Ruins, and Inspiring Vantage. These are quite a bit cheaper than the Fetch Lands and Shock Lands. They are still not super cheap, but having a 3-color deck really needs you to have a solid mana base in order for it to run properly. As far as creatures are concerned, most of them are kinda necessary for the deck, but Elesh Norn can be replaced with Korak's Ascended Hero. He's not quite as good, but he does have a quite similar effect, specifically because he's going to be helping our spirit tokens. A solid budget replacement for Collective Brutality would be Funeral Charm. Now this card allows us to make us discard a card or our opponent discard a card if that's the thing we need to do, or we can deal with creatures, and we can also give one of our creatures Swamp Walk if that is something that would be applicable in the game you're currently playing. As far as sideboard options are concerned, I would run Deathmark, Duress, Rakdos Charm, Smash to Smithereens as some simple replacements for most of the expensive cards in the sideboard. Obviously, you're not going to have any way of dealing with the blue control, which does give us a little bit of problems, but this does allow us to deal with graveyards, some creatures, and our opponent's hand with Duress, so we can actually take cards out of there that may be problematic for us. And that is going to be the entire Mardu Reanimator deck. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Subscribe to Giant Monster Games, like this video, and share it if you want to see more videos just like this one. Until next time, don't forget to game like a giant monster.